Hey there, YouTube. I'm Ikitsu. This is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel, and welcome to a little bit of Sins of Solar Empire 2. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about Advent defenses, and they're actually really, really good right now. I think that they're probably some of the strongest that are in the game. Of course, that's because they're competing with like Vasari, who don't really have much going for them in that sort of field whatsoever. They get completely stomped by Tech Enclave because that's all Enclave really has going for them, and they beat Tech Primacy because Tech Primacy basically sort of half-assed Tech Enclave's homework. So, I mean, they're not really competing with much here, but their defensive structures are really interesting. I think that the way they've changed them up does make them quite good right now, puts them into a much better position than they were before, and they were already pretty good previously. So let's start off with the laser defense platform. Now, this was already a pretty good defensive structure. Unlike the other two, the autocannon defense and the pulse defense cannon, the laser defense platform has got shields, and that's actually a really big deal when you're trying to defend into sort of low intensity attacks during the very early game where maybe you're defending with your other stuff there. And the reason for that is that the shield points do mean that this thing gets a shield burst, which means that if it's getting something backing it up, like the repairs from the factory, unlike the other types of platforms where they would just sort of like get that healing, the laser defense platform is going to get the healing, which is going to allow it to get the shield burst, which is going to restore all of its shields. So it's kind of getting both. And behind that shield burst, while its shields are getting eroded a second time, it's going to get another set of healing. So it's going to be back up to full health for their armor and hull points. And then the cycle sort of continues. So if you don't breach a certain point with the laser defense platform, you can't actually kill it. And that point where you have to get is a lot higher than it would be for an autocannon defense turret or a pulse defense turret. So that element is actually really, really powerful. There's also a bunch of things that Advent get that make their shields way stronger. So that all helps out quite a bit, especially they've got structural shield point techs that are capable of making these even better at that sort of thing there. In addition, highest damage per second base out of any of the three defense platforms of its type, making them quite good for their sort of base values, although notably, both of the other two will outscale them a little bit in damage per second when it comes to the extreme sort of late game once you've got all your techs rolling and what have you. They do have that sort of higher starting standard, and if you've got all the techs and you're playing as Primacy, for example, you are capable of keeping up for a while, but things like the munitions plant for tech is going to like throw them a little bit above this, especially if they've also got the defense grid controls on their starbase or whatever it's called. That's also going to give them that added bonus. And then the base techs for Vasari are just a little bit higher than Advent, so it's going to push them a little bit above what the laser defense platform does. Although you're going to be really close to what the Vasari are doing as well. So the laser defense platform, excellent in the early game where you've got those values that you need. They're excellent because they've got that sort of better durability into a lot of situations that the other two don't have. And they're actually pretty scalable into the late game thanks to some other things that we'll get into a little bit later. So the laser defense platform's special ability that they added is the Psionic Burst. Now, this is very similar to the Flechette from Tech, and what I would say is that the Psionic Burst is just weaker out of the gate than Flechette. However, it has the potential to scale to be a lot stronger than the Tech version of this. It has a 30-second cooldown, 7,500 range. Instead of being a cone, it's just a big circle. A little bit longer range, but the circle technically has a little bit of a lesser area. Arguably, I'd say that the Psionic Burst is usually going to get slightly more enemy ships inside of it, but it really depends. I think that the Flechette and the Psionic Burst out of the gate are very comparable in terms of what they're going to hit. For damage, this is 50 damage, same as the Flechette as well, but there's two key differences to Psionic Burst versus what Tech is coming in with. So this has 50 damage, the Flechette has 50 damage. The Flechette has 50 pierce, which means that it's capable of bypassing the durability of bombers, which is actually a pretty big deal in terms of how much damage you're actually doing to those things. However, where Advent sort of ends up pulling ahead at the end of the game is that they also add psi power to the damage done by Psionic Burst. And this can make it so that it's dealing enough damage to basically one-shot the majority of fighters or bombers that are in the game. The only ones that really survive that are the Vasari heavy fighters, and they're going to be heavily damaged if they take a 350 blast from a Psionic Burst. That's going to basically just completely ruin the day of whatever Vasari fighter pilot was going around there thinking that they're really tough shit. So You can get a really, really high cap potential out of Sonic Burst if people are really going late game carrier into Advent, but this is also high enough that they're capable of putting in some serious hurt against heavy torpedoes, heavy missiles, things like a Marza going in and just using its ability there. All of those sort of things, Sonic Burst is much, much more effective against than other equivalent types of abilities. Now, of course, the Visari Phase Missile Trap is capable of catching all of those and timing them out. So they're strictly speaking a bit better, but the 30-second cooldown on Sonic Burst, I would say, puts it in the league above that once you got to that point. However, at the start of the game, Sonic Burst is by far the weakest out of the three abilities. And it's still good. It's still usable during the early game. It's still going to help protect you against missiles, still protect you against a lot of strike craft by adding in the sort of additional hits or being added to your additional own strike craft. But Sonic Burst is starting off weak and scaling into the late game compared to the other abilities there. So the way that the laser defense platform works, it's technically speaking the best out of the three of them into raids, but in kind of a way where it's like the first among losers. The laser defense platform still has no real way to catch up to any raiders that are going through the system. But if the enemy does have to go past your laser defense platform for whatever reason, strictly speaking, they're doing the most damage in that sort of scenario there. Their firing arcs are actually surprisingly decent. And in addition, Sonic Burst does sort of actually do good damage into Corvettes. It does a bit more range. It's going to more realistically hit a better cluster of them thanks to it being a circle instead of the Flechette cone. And 50 damage with 0 Pierce still does the same damage as 50 damage, 50 Pierce that you get on the Flechette. And of course, the Visari version of this doesn't even work on Corvettes at all. Same thing with the siege ships. If they have to go past this for some reason or another, it's technically the best. But realistically speaking, none of the three of these really have much to do in the event that enemies are just pushing past you with siege ships. Where the laser defense platform, of course, is going to shine is when your opponent comes in with a real fleet, like they just come into the regular fleet of ships. The laser defense platform, if your opponent doesn't have enough ships, thanks to you having shields, basically they won't be able to kill these as easily as they could the other ones. They're much more survivable in the event that they're fighting against them, and you've got the ability to use your healing against that. Thanks to your shield burst, you've got a lot of damage potential on these things. And they have that sort of synergy with the other ships that are around them that's going to come into this a little bit there. All in all, like as you get into the further game, having more of these, it's going to be harder and harder for your opponent to slip missiles or ordnance past them. And because they've only got a 30-second cooldown on the Sonic Burst, which is even less than the Flechette, which has 45 seconds, you're going to have the ability to wipe out quite a few waves of either enemy ordnance or strike craft. All very, very good things to be able to do during those sort of later game fights. The next thing here, got the beam defense platform. Now, the beam defense platform is really, really bad historically. It is something that I would have anticipated if they didn't add a unique ability to all of these, would have been the one to get buffed. While it does have good shields compared to the others having none, its overall hit points, again, is not twice as good as the laser defense platform. And its damage per second is actually really bad. It's got 25 damage per second as compared to 30 on the other two armor-piercing platforms. And it's only got 500 Pierce instead of 600, which you would get on the Gauss platform or on the Visari missile platform. So you're doing less damage, you're doing less Pierce on a platform that still costs as much as those two, relatively speaking, in terms of opportunity cost. But what they did instead was they gave it by far the most powerful of the secondary abilities when you look at it from a more holistic point of view, even though the beam defense platform does not get any stronger from having it. So what the beam defense platforms gained was Synergetic Ward. Synergetic Ward basically adds a pretty large scale radius. You can see the effect of it here. That gives any of your structures that are around it an additional 200 hit points and an additional 20 psi power. And you're basically always going to want to get 5 of these things for that purpose if you're going for the sort of maximum bonus from this. This also does work on themselves, so you really only just need 5 of them. That will give you an extra 1,000 shield points, which on the beam platforms itself, that's going to basically increase it to 2,750 shield points. For the laser defense platform, you're going from 1,500 to 2,500. That's a very big bonus to survivability for these sort of things. So the beam defense platform is a support type tool. In addition, that extra 100 psi power, that's increasing your psionic burst by 100 points. That's tripling the damage that you do, and it means that you're actually out damaging the flechette burst against bombers just from having the 5 beam defense platforms. If you've got them in that context of improving your other stuff, it's not something that I would say you build first necessarily. I would say that they're built in the sort of context of improving the other defenses that you've got around you. So once you've built up a number of laser defense platforms or hangar defenses, you start slapping in a few beam defense platforms, and they'll sort of multiply the effectiveness of those other platforms. Or, of course, you send them around to your starbase, and they add a lot to the starbase. Any of those sort of situations is pretty good there. One thing to note that's very important, the beam defense platform is in a unique position as far as its damage goes. The 5 heavy lasers here, if you've got 2 laser defense platforms, which is the same number of slots as the beam defense platform, 3 laser defense platforms is doing 75 damage per second at 35 pierce. Divided by 3 against capital ships puts them at 25 damage per second, which means that the laser defense platform has the exact same damage per second output as the beam defense platform against capitals. And they outperform the beam defense platform against command ships. The reason is that against a command ship with 600 durability, the heavy beam is doing 12.5 damage per second, whereas 2 laser defense platforms, they're doing 75 damage per second divided by 4. So they're doing just under 20 damage per second. They're actually out damaging the beam defense platform in that situation there. Neither of them are doing great, but the laser defense platform is doing slightly better there. The only situation where the beam defense platform actually outperforms relative to the laser defense platform, if I recall correctly, I don't think there's any actually. You can end up in a situation where you're getting like halved damage from the laser defense platform at 37.5 against cruisers, but that's still higher than the 25 damage per second against the beam defense platform. So the beam defense platform really is not there for its damage output, even against the targets that you would expect it to be there for, because the laser defense platform is going to outperform the beam defense platform even into the hardened targets. So you really, really want to take this for its secondary effect more than anything else. It's not useful at all whatsoever as an anti-ship gun. So yeah, in terms of the beam defense platform, technically speaking, it is useful into raids, but generally speaking, the timing of it is going to be a bit too rough to actually make it useful into raids. The reason is that the synergetic ward does actually boost up your hangar defenses and makes them better into a raiding force. So a bunch of corvettes coming into the system, if you've got like 5 beam defense platforms adding 100 psi power to your hangar defense, that will actually make it so that you deal a lot more damage against those raiders. But realistically speaking, you're not going to be able to afford doing that. And if you could afford to do that, it would actually just be better to get 3 more hangar defenses than to get the beam defense platform, because there's no way you have a huge number of hangar defenses and all 5 beam defense platforms by the time an enemy raid comes in, especially not on like all your planets, because you kind of need that on multiple planets if you're really trying to stop anything. Same thing with the siege attack, although this is more realistically going to come into play. If your opponent comes in with a bunch of siege ships and they're trying to cheese out one of your planets there, you're much more likely to be able to get a bunch of hangar defenses and a bunch of beam defense platforms in that timing. And in that particular scenario, that actually is going to work out relatively okay. So again, the beam defense platform is technically the best into those 2 situations. It's more capable into someone trying to cheese you with siege platforms or siege ships, and in either case, you're the best amongst things that are not particularly useful. The beam defense platform, again, is not necessarily that good into situations where your opponent is attacking you with a minor attack fleet, but it is still pretty okay. The reason is that hopefully by that point in time, you do have other ships that are relying on psi power. And once you've got the situation where you've got other things relying on psi power, the beam defense platform becomes relatively good. You're more likely to have that by the time you got a very late game defensive cluster, in which case the bonus that you're getting from synergetic ward really comes into its own, and you end up getting a huge amount of benefit from having beam defense platforms in there. But you're never going to want more than 5 of these things, maybe 6 or 7, just so that you can have enough that are going to replace the dead ones as they sort of get destroyed. But you don't want a full entourage of beam defense platforms. All in all, it's a support utility thing. It still does good damage. It's not amazing damage, but it's still good damage that you're going to add in there. So you might as well have them. I think they're quite good right now, but the damage numbers are really weird to me. I do wish that they had maybe a little bit more pierce or something, or maybe if they had slightly better damage or something to put them into situations where they outperform the laser defense platform. Because I can't think of a target that the laser defense platform actually would be the inferior option for. Now, the next thing here is the hangar defense. Now, Advent hangar defenses used to be really, really bad. The Advent hangar defense costs 3 supply and just has your sort of typical 3 squadrons, 1 squadron per supply. Now, the problem with this is that unlike the tech hangar defense, which costs 2, has 2 squadrons, you don't have a bunch of guns on top of the hangar defense here. So the hangar defense for tech has 2 squadrons, it costs 2 supply. So 1 squadron, 1 supply, but you, in addition to that, get a whole bunch of point defense guns that are sort of tacked onto the top of it. And those are capable of protecting your defensive clusters against enemy ordnance. They make it so you can more easily win fights against bombers or fighters. They make it so you can defend your other structures against missiles. They're all around really, really useful for that purpose there. The Advent hangar defense was just a naked hangar that's got 3 squadrons in it for 3 costs. You're getting the exact same amount of squadrons as tech were, and you were not getting any additional benefit as a result of that. Now, the upgrades that both of them got, in addition to what they already had, I think that the hangar defense for Advent is now like kind of on par or maybe better situationally than Tech's hangars, which I think was kind of necessary because it's kind of weird that Advent had really, really weak hangar defensive bay. Now, you've got really good shield points, armor points, and hull points on this thing. And funny enough, they're actually one of the better targets to use cleanse on. So you can actually just blow up your own hangar defense and get back a ton of hit points on all of your defenses. It's quite interesting that that's one of the fringe uses that you can use for this, but keep that in mind. However, you're looking at something that's a little bit expensive to do that too. It's still pretty good for it, I think. But yeah, it's not really meant to be like frontlining. You're not supposed to be taking hits with this thing really. So just keep it in the back and make sure that's not taking too much damage. The interesting thing that they added to the hangar defense for tech or for Advent here, empowered anima is their new ability here. This is very, very strong. You get a base value of plus 20 shield points and a plus 20% bonus to weapon damage for the strike craft from the hangar defenses. Now, this is really, really powerful. You also get additional bonuses from your psi power. For every 100 psi power, you get an additional 20 shield points, bringing you to the point where you can pretty easily get up to 80 at the extreme end of the game. And your weapon damage can be increased by, I believe, up to 50%, maybe a little bit higher than that. So this makes it so that your strike craft are way more powerful than they would be if you didn't have access to empowered anima. Now, this does mean that if you have got a hangar defense and you don't have the empowered anima yet, you're doing less damage than the laser defense platform because you can get 3 laser defense platforms for 1 hangar defense. Once you've got a bunch of psi power and you've got empowered anima, you are capable of matching up to a much greater extent with the laser defense platform on a pound for pound basis. You're still kind of behind the laser defense platform, but you're pretty close. You're certainly ahead of the beam defense platform at that point in time as well. So basically, the hangar defense becomes a really versatile sort of direct fight tool. The only problem is that you'll still take a bunch of damage from enemy point defenses and stuff like that, which will erode the damage effectiveness of the hangar defense, meaning that in a slugfight against an enemy fleet, the laser defense platform is still probably stronger in that sort of direct brawl fight, but the hangar defense is a lot closer than it used to be. Now, the hangar defense previously and currently is still the go-to choice against raids. If you've got a cluster of hangar defenses that are sort of like in an awkward position and you've got your strike craft in a good spot, they can basically just hop in with their Corsairs or whatever it is, their raiders, and what'll happen is the hangar defense is going to do a lot of damage to those raiding ships. Now, you do have to have a decent number of these in the gravity well where you're trying to defend, but these things are great for keeping away those sorts of ships from your structures, making it so that they can't really easily attack into the areas where you've got those critical buildings. So I think that the hangar defense is probably the like tied basically with I would say compared to the tech one against raids. The reason is that tech having like the point defense guns actually matters quite a bit into raiders. But if you do have the ability to actually get empowered anima, which is not that hard to get by itself, into a raid, you're capable of doing a little bit more damage with the Advent hanger as compared to the tech hanger. In addition, after some changes, the Advent fighter craft are a little bit better than the tech ones, and fighter craft are what you want to use to ward off raids, not bombers. So that combination of all those different things makes the hanger defense actually really, really good into enemy raids there. Same thing with sieges. You're much more likely as well to have empowered anima and some psi power. So the hanger defense becomes very, very powerful at destroying a lot of enemy siege ship rushes. Mind you, you are probably running into a situation where you probably didn't switch to having enough bomber complements against enemy siege ships, but you'll still probably do fine with the hanger defense. It's better than really any of your other options into that sort of scenario there. If you don't have an absolute massive amount of hanger defenses, though, you might not do enough damage quickly enough to get rid of all of them before they take out your planet. That might be fine depending on what type of planet that is that you're defending there. So into regular attacks just from an enemy fleet, assuming that they've brought a balanced fleet composition in, sort of just trying to grind through all your defenses and take out your planet. The hanger defense is still technically a little bit worse than the laser defense platform 9 times out of 10. And I would actually argue that the beam defense platform by that point in time, since it's going to be augmenting a bunch of laser defense platforms, is also probably a little bit stronger. But the hanger defense is still capable of putting up an okay fight into that scenario there. It's not dead weight or anything like that. It's just that you're going to have to watch out for the fact that you're going to be losing a lot of your damage per second as you take attrition on your fighters and your bombers during those types of fights there. Once you get to the really large fights as well, the hanger defense is going to fall even further behind because there's going to be way more point defense on the field. There's going to be way more enemy strike craft on the field. All of that's going to erode the ability for these hanger defenses to really contribute anything to that fight there. Even if you try to mass them, you're not going to have the kind of strike capacity to dominate the gravity well, because there's a limited number of slots that you got for these defensive structures, and with the cost of 3 for the hanger defense, you're not going to have a late game just huge blob of these things. Now, you will have a late game huge blob of these things against Advent because you have to worry about Quell, and these are the only things that really hold up against that because you can still use your strike craft, but realistically speaking, generally speaking, it's going to be the worst out of the options that you got available here. Now, the next thing that we want to talk about is actually the Lesser Factory, and this is one of the strongest defensive healers in the game. The Lesser Factory is a 1 civilian slot unit, so you don't even actually lose out on your laser defense platforms by getting a couple Lesser Factories. Now, Advent is kind of stretched on their civilian orbital slots, so this isn't actually free or anything like that, but 1 civilian slot for a defensive formation, especially because you're only really going to be heavily defending certain types of worlds. They're generally speaking not going to be the ones that are heavy on the civilian infrastructure. You can get away with throwing down like some lesser factories as just a part of your forward defensive clusters, and they'll do a fantastic job of keeping everything alive while maintaining your ability to build as many laser defense platforms as you can. I think that makes the Lesser Factory just way stronger in context than any of the other healing platforms in the game there. Now, what you got for this here is you've got like a slightly weaker heal, I believe, than the other equivalents. But again, you're looking at a situation where you're getting a pretty comparable amount of heals from something that really has no business being able to do that at all. So I really think that this is one of the more fantastic ways to get that effect there. In addition, you can use the Lesser Factories to produce ships to defend yourself with. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you're in this really big siege, you could actually use your Lesser Factory, produce a couple ships in the background there, like a couple Tempests or whatever, and it'll help out in that sort of situation quite a bit. Theoretically, you could use a Lesser Factory to help with raids, especially if you've got lots of Lesser Factories producing more light ships faster is a way to counter those raids. But you don't want to be trickling a bunch of ships into a bunch of raiders that are sort of circling it, and it'll die before it can really get too much done there. Into a siege, it's similarly, you could build a bunch of ships to try and counter those as they're sort of coming in. It does help in that situation a little bit, obviously, but you require a lot of resources to be able to do that. If you don't have that resource gain, then that's a pretty costly way to try to do that. and you might get supply blocked if you're already running around with a big fleet somewhere else. So there's some limitations on what this can do in those situations, and once you get into the larger fleet battles, having this in the middle of your defensive cluster, popping out the occasional ship, they're probably just going to get wiped out as they sort of pop out there. They're not really going to contribute a ton to that sort of situation there. If they were capable of building Icona's Guardians, that would actually be really, really fantastic. But unfortunately, it's a light factory, so you're not capable of getting those kind of things out of that sort of situation there. The next one here is the Temple of Renewal. This thing is a sort of like equivalent structure that costs like 3 and is your sort of support healer structure. But it's very different because the actual healing ability is on the lesser factory. This gives you access to the recharge antimatter ability, and this is really only useful if you've got your whole fleet sitting here. Like if you have a mothership sitting in the midst of your defensive cluster, being able to use recharge antimatter, making it so that they're regaining like 300 antimatter every like 10 seconds or whatever, 120 seconds, I don't know. You're capable of popping off a lot more shield bursts. So you'll survive way better if you got a Temple of Renewal and you've got your fleet sitting there as well. It's a very powerful effect, but it doesn't really help your defensive cluster at all. The way that you have to think about the Temple of Renewal as it sort of stands is that you would have this if you know for a fact that you're going to be able to sit there with your fleet on top of your defensive cluster and fight your opponent with your defenses plus your fleet together. However, once you get access to recharge shields, it switches roles completely. Now, this doesn't cost any antimatter. Recharge antimatter costs nothing. However, recharge shield costs a lot of antimatter. This is where all of your antimatter is going to be going. However, it's a really big shield restore over 10 seconds that's capable of really spamming out there across a wide variety of targets there. So having a couple of these guys that are capable of using those recharge shields, you're going to be able to bring back shields really rapidly to a bunch of your different targets there, keeping them alive for way longer. You can actually keep like recharge shields turned off as well until something is on the shield burst timer, at which point you like turn on recharge shields, you've got the lesser factories healing them. It's going to keep whatever it is that's taking all the hits still alive, making it so that they're not getting destroyed during that time. And then once that minute's up, they get the shield burst. You can turn off the recharge shields again and wait till they get that, so that they're getting those shield bursts like very consistently without taking very much damage to their hull. I think that that's a way to make these stretch a little bit further because they run out of antimatter way too quickly. Still, this is an incredibly powerful tool for the way that Advent currently are. Previously, I would not have bothered with it that much, but right now I think they're actually really strong. So, no effect whatsoever with Temple of Renewal really into raids, especially because you're not going to have access to recharge shields likely by the time you're getting hit by those. It wouldn't make a ton of sense to tech into that either, so it's not really that useful in that context there. And again, nothing at all against enemy siege ships. Where this really comes in is, again, when your opponent comes in with a real proper fleet there. Now, I do think that Temple Renewal, once you get into the real proper fleet fights, the fact that it does cost 3 supply for your military orbital slots does hold it back a little bit, same as the other healers. But I still think that this is actually a really important tool for the way that Advent defenses currently work. So you'd still probably want to have a couple of these things. Now, that's all of the basic structures. Let's talk about the Transcensia Starbase and what they changed for this. And some of the things they've changed for this are incredibly important there. Now, the Transcensia has always been a really quite decent starbase. It has, on paper, relatively low attack numbers there. 44 medium lasers with 6 damage per second with 250 pierce is not great. However, unlike the Argonev, this thing is capable of putting a lot of its guns, regardless of which types you get out there, onto a target that's directly in front of it. They're capable of getting a lot more of their firepower into a single arc, and that really does matter. Still, though, I don't think that the current best way to play the Transcensia is to develop it as a gun platform, and instead you use it as a synergy platform, but we'll get into that sort of here. So, the new abilities that they've added to it for offense are the kinetic surge missiles. And if you're building this in a way that you're trying to get like kinetic surge missiles, you have to keep in mind that they're coming in fairly late on the tech tree here. I believe that they are... Where are they? God, I cannot actually find stuff on the stupid thing here. Good lord, where is it? Was it in the missiles? No, it's not. Well, either way, I can't find it, but They're there up here in tier four. By the time you get the access to that, you also have access to meteoroid control. The thing about this is that like meteoroid control is probably the stronger of the two effects there. You are getting one for one on psi power. So if you've got the 300 psi power, you're getting 400 damage per second, um, up to 5 seconds. So you're looking at 2,000 damage with 500 pierce from a meteor swarm full effect. That's huge damage. Yeah, you've got a 90-second cooldown compared to the area effect on the kinetic surge missiles, but the splash damage radius and splash damage bonus for that added to your starbase swarm missiles, like you're looking at a relatively okay sort of missile system, not an amazing one, and you're adding that onto like something that's going to give you a kind of okay amount of splash. If you've got all that psi power, that is going to be a pretty good amount of splash, but you can make the Transcensia an absolute monster compared to the other two star bases at wiping out large amounts of enemy um, sub-capital ships, basically, like cruisers, regular ships. But I don't necessarily know by the time you're in tier 4 how much you really care about being able to take out an entire fleet of enemy cruisers. It's probably still important, but that's a lot of commitment to being able to do that sort of a bit there compared to the other things that you could be doing with this. Now, they didn't add anything to the Starbase Plasma. The Starbase Plasma is already kind of strong for taking out enemy like capitals and stuff like that. Again, because they're capable of really concentrating that fire onto a single target. But I do think that there is a place for potentially a kinetic surge missile type of build there where you just really want to focus down specific types of enemy ships there, wipe out a lot of their support firepower, and make it so that it's just their capital ships against your starbase or what have you. That's possible. Now, they added some extra stuff to defense. The Sonic Shield, I think, is new. I'm pretty sure. It just gives you some extra bonuses to shields. Quite powerful, as well as some damage reduction, which is pretty okay there. But the more important one is the Area Shield. Now, what this does is it gives you a radius of the entire gravity well, if I recall correctly. And what this does is that all your structures in the gravity well take like basically no damage, and all of that damage instead goes onto the Transcensia. And this is incredibly powerful. This is a really, really strong ability. There's also a really funny thing that you can do with this, where you have your entire defensive cluster located where they're going to be fighting. You have your Transcensia, like some stupid inane place with a couple of the temples of renewal that are just hitting the starbase, so that all of their shield renewals are going onto the starbase. And what'll happen is that defensive cluster that's fighting over wherever it is going to take like 0 damage, and you're going to have your starbase receiving 100% of the shield restores, making it so that you're basically taking no damage to like anything. Sort of fleet wide, while your little defensive structures are doing like full damage to whatever it is they're fighting against. I think that's really funny. I don't necessarily know if that's the best way to do it. I'd rather have the starbase so that's capable of lending its firepower to the fight there, but that is something you can do that you should keep in mind there. Now, Area Shield, I think, is very meta-defining in terms of what it does. It comes in fairly late, but it's capable of making it so that whatever structures that you've got around there are no longer vulnerable. The way that I think of like things like autocannons and Gauss cannons and the pulse defenses is that they're kind of expendable. Like you build a whole bunch of them around your starbase, and your opponent sort of like will probably take out a whole bunch of your defenses instead of the starbase, because a starbase is actually really hard to kill. But if you focus down all those other platforms, that drops your damage per second against their fleet, their attacking fleet, really, really, really quickly. So you can get rid of all those like laser defense platforms, all those beam defense platforms, and all the hangar defenses really, really fast. And then after all those are gone, you can focus on the starbase. With Advent, you can't. You have to focus down the starbase first. Now, if you do decide to focus down the laser defense platform first, you're going to do a bunch of damage to it. Eventually, the starbase is going to like run out of shields or whatever, and then you'll instantly pop the laser defense platform. But you've just spent like a half hour like killing one laser defense platform, and the starbase is still there, and like it's going to get shield bursts while you kill maybe a second laser defense platform. Like you're going to have lost a lot of your fleet attacking into a Transcensia, trying to focus down the less important targets there. In addition, you're getting that Temple of Renewal, and it's like throwing a whole ton of extra healing onto your Transcensia, making it so that all of that healing is functionally healing your laser defense platform, which is also getting healed because it's like losing that 10% over time there. That's also just going to get restored as well. So I think that you can use Area Shield to make it so that the Transcensia itself doesn't have to really do that much damage. and you can focus it entirely on other supportive type abilities and on defensive upgrades. So you could have like the structural integrity 1, 2, and 3, making it so that's way more durable, has way more shields, and it's more survivable while it's using that sort of area shield effect for the rest of your fleet there. And you can go with the psionic shield, but that's already 5 defensive upgrades, right? So you've only got 3 upgrades left, period. You could throw that into like all area effect if you really wanted to, but you could also throw it into some utility like the psi power projector, which is another new thing that got added here. The psi projector that they added here just gives you a plus 50 to psi power. I think this is generically useful now that there's a bunch of stuff that uses that. It also works on your ships in the gravity well, so this also helps your capitals and your like command ships and stuff like that. So that's an additional 50 that didn't exist before for Advent that they can use now while they're on defense. I think that's a very, very powerful sort of effect there. Lethargy is the other one. I don't necessarily think that I rate this as that relevant. You're getting it in Hostility 3. This would prevent people from like doing raids very effectively because they're going to be moving really slowly through the gravity well. You're probably also going to be slowing them down thanks to phase jamming. Well, you definitely will be slowing them down thanks to phase jamming. So having a raiding group like go into the system, try to get around to wherever it is they're trying to go, and then leave is going to be severely hampered by the Transcensia if you take that. But I don't think that lethargy is strong enough of an effect to really rate taking it when you've got so many really powerful effects or abilities or weapons or tools that you want to take on starbases currently. So yeah, those are all the things that they added to the Transcensia, and unlike with the others, I think these fully change the sort of mindset that you can take if you want to. Now, you can still go for like a whole bunch of different weapons and like attack upgrades. You can take the Meteor Swarm, you can take Evangelizing Nodes to push your culture out forward. And then just take like the 3 structural integrities here, and that would still work really well. It worked well before, it could work really well now. But the other thing that you can do now is you can go for like a full defensive one where you've got like Planetary Shield, you've got the Area Shield, you've got Structural Integrity 1, 2, and 3, you've got the Psionic Shield there, you've got the Psi Projector, and then maybe you take like either Zealous Labor or you take the Meteor Swarm, or you take Evangelizing Nodes, or you take, whatever it is that you want. And in that sort of configuration, your Starbase does virtually no damage. It's got the basic weapon and it's got the ability to cast Meteor Swarm. However, you've got this entire surrounding flotilla of laser defense platforms, beam defense platforms, and hangar defenses. And all of those are capable of outputting a really good amount of damage. So the starbase itself doesn't have to do as much damage because they're not capable of killing your laser defense platform. They're not capable of killing your beam defense platform off. So all of those things are capable of doing their full damage the entire duration of the fight. So I think that that's a new way for you to be able to play the Transcensia, and I think that that's one of the more interesting things about the way that Advent worked, because that's not an option for any other faction in the game. Every faction, Tech Enclave included, still has to consider the fact that, like, if they build a whole ton of laser defense platforms, those laser defense, or sorry, autocannon defense platforms for their high DPS and their ability to like do damage to whatever they're firing at. If they all just get killed, then suddenly you're in a situation where, okay, well, I don't have any real damage per second output anymore. I have to get all that damage per second output from my starbase itself, which is going to be lower than if you had the starbases plus all the defense platforms. For Advent, you've got Starbase plus all the defense platforms basically guaranteed. It's just that the Starbase probably is going to do a lot less damage. The other way, of course, that you can do this is you could give it like the Psi Projector. You could just give it the 3 sort of basic attack values here. You can rely on the fact that your laser defense platform, extra 1,000 hit points, everything else that you sort of got here, it's durable enough. It's still capable of working. And then you take like the Starbase Plasma, Starbase Swarm Missile, the Kinetic Surge Missiles, and the Meteor Swarm. And in this scenario, you're hoping that you sort of like eradicate a whole bunch of your enemy before they can even really do any damage to you. The last option, if you're up against Advent, even if you're forward, you go like 3 auxiliary hangars, you go with the 3 structural integrity. You could still actually take the area shield. That would still actually technically work there. You could also use the Psionic Shield. That would also technically work there. But your ability to fire plasma, ability to fire missiles, ability to fire meteor swarm, that's all kind of delayed or removed when fighting against another Advent. So you'd want to go with the hangar defenses and you'd want to go with the hangar bays. As well as survivability. In that particular case, I actually think just throwing on like Zealous Labor and the Evangelizing Nodes, or the Psi Projector actually, Side projector is a passive, and it still does seem to work. Passive seem to work while you're quelled. Um, so I do think that you could use that to boost up your hanger defenses and make them stronger. That would be another option there. So there's a lot of different ways that you can build your Transcensia out, depending on what you want out of it. Even if they're relatively frontline, evangelizing nodes can be quite strong because culture for Advent actually does give them good combat abilities and stuff like that. So there's a lot to go with Advent. The other thing to note about Advent defenses, this is one of the few factions where I think that the phase jump inhibitors are really, really powerful. The reason is, again, that ability to make it so that your phase jump inhibitor can't be sniped out because you take an area shield. If you've got area shield and you've got like a phase jump inhibitor sort of nested into your opponent can't kill it, realistically speaking, without taking tremendous losses to their fleet, because they basically have to commit their fleet to go fight your entire defensive cluster to get rid of the phase jump inhibitor. So the normal thing, you run in, you quickly snipe the phase jump inhibitor, you quickly get out. That's gone if you've got a support Transcensia that's really, really durable. Um, and thanks to that, like Advent is one of those few factions that can really just lock an opponent in and force them to fight against your defensive cluster. Because of that, I actually think that Advent defenses are really, really strong right now. I do think that Tech Enclave is still stronger than them in terms of defense. 2-star base is really hard to deny the power of. But I think that they're above Visari right now, and I think they're definitely above Tech Primacy in terms of what their defenses are capable of doing. So, in any event, though, that's going to be everything that we've got to talk about for Advent defensive structures. We've got the ominous smiley pumpkin face over here. That is the Transcensia. We're going to just leave you with that image now that I pointed it out. But in any event, hope you found this one enjoyable. And of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.